So in this act, we'll go through how Callas trusted her gut in two different departments, should we say, in her artistic choices and in some bigger career decisions that she made. And let's watch a clip first from the same interview once again from 1969, where this opera director called Franco Siciliani, I think it's Franco, I have to check that though, yeah, he talks about Callas's artistic integrity.
On a parlé beaucoup des caprices de Maria Callas, etc., de son caractère particulier, etc. Bien, et je vais parler. Personne plus de moi ne peut pas dire la vérité sur ce sujet. La conscience artistique de cette femme, c'était tellement énorme qu'elle prétendait également la même conscience artistique dans le chef d'orchestre, la même conscience artistique, oui, dans la direction du théâtre et dans tous les castes de l'ensemble. Et la distribution. Alors, quelquefois, cette même conscience n'était pas dans les autres. Et alors, elle s'est refusée de participer à une situation qui n'était pas artistiquement parfaite. Alors, ça a commencé à dire un caractère devient difficile. Non, j'ai toujours estimé beaucoup cette rigueur absolue qu'il avait avant tout avec soi. Pour cette raison, elle prétendait justement aussi dans les autres collaborateurs.
C'est pas moi, c'est envers la musique encore qu'on prétend ça.
Merci de cette explication.
I just love Siciliani's Italian accent when he talks in French. It's very cute. And also, that actually, as a side note, that whole interview I love because there are so many, there's one Frenchman and two Italians who speak French actually very good. Siciliani is clearly not as fluent in French as Luchino Visconti, but still, there's no talk during the whole interview about how well everybody there speaks French. It's just expected that, of course, these people know how to speak French, even if it's not their mother tongue. But I'm guessing that also at the time in Italy, it was maybe mandatory to study French as well because they're neighbor countries. So that's why probably they know French. Even now, I know some Italians who speak French just because they've studied at school. But still, it's just very cool with this interview in particular that they spoke originally, I think, for maybe like 3 hours straight or something, like had these huge, profound discussions on a Sunday, and the whole thing was streamed on TV. I miss these kind of programs. Well, they've just changed their form, so now these sort of deep discussions are maybe done in podcasts, for example. But definitely check out this whole interview if you want to on YouTube. But back to this artistic integrity thing. So Callas was first and foremost appreciated for the choices she made in her own singing, her own artistic choices in her interpretations. But it's a different story if she was appreciated for the other ideas that she had for the artistic direction of entire scenes or the whole opera even. And the reason is because at the core, she was paid to sing, to do nothing else basically. But she went above and beyond, and she had an artistic vision many times. I don't know if like in every production she was in, but in general, she probably had good ideas about how a certain scene could be made better, for example. But she wasn't paid for this sort of judgment and discernment that she had. She wasn't, after all, the artistic director of the opera in question. But like with Luchino Visconti, he talks about in this interview, when they worked together, it was perfect because they were just as perfectionistic as the other one. So they worked well in tandem. They were just as willing to go the extra mile to make the production really extraordinary. So anyway, since Callas had this great sensibility and knowledge for making good artistic choices and the willingness to do the extra work to make it happen, it was worth for others to listen to what she had on her mind and then hopefully trust the vision that she had. If she had a strong hunch about something, how to make it work in the best way possible, it was best if others, and especially the other creative directing forces of the whole production, could go along with her, because they realized how much talent and vision she had. But if others, or someone in particular, wasn't on the same page with her and didn't appreciate this, or felt that she was stepping on someone's toes, there were problems. And then, because of that, she was also labeled often overly perfectionistic. And of course, there's always this discourse about, because she was a woman, that's for sure, that for some men, definitely it must have been a bit hard maybe to accept that she also wanted to be a creative force maybe in the production. But that's maybe a discussion for another day. At least with Luchino Visconti, their collaboration worked very nicely, because he realized how valuable Callas can be with this whole thing, and how their good collaboration can make the whole production so much better. And of course, we assume that even if Callas had an idea of how a scene could be made better, if they tested it out and it didn't work, they would just change it. So it wasn't like she was overruling everybody there in the production, most likely. I'm guessing she was still very cordial and didn't want to overrule everybody. But all in all, the central idea I want to communicate is that the more you have experience or competence in a matter, the more you can trust it yourself, that you have good judgment, and the more others will, can, or should trust it as well. And there's a really interesting passage of a book that I just read recently. So I got a Kindle recently, which is really cool. And I read first this book by Naval Ravikant, who's an angel investor in Silicon Valley. And he has some pretty interesting ideas. I don't agree with everything he says in the book, as is normal, but this one quote about discernment and judgment was very intriguing to me. He says that demonstrated judgment, credibility around the judgment, is so critical. Warren Buffett, so the famous investor Warren Buffett, wins here because he has massive credibility. He's been highly accountable. He's been right over and over in the public domain. He's built a reputation for very high integrity, so you can trust him. People will throw infinite leverage behind him because of his judgment. Nobody asks him how hard he works. Nobody asks him where he wakes up, when he wakes up, or when he goes to sleep. They're like, Warren, just do your thing. Judgment, especially demonstrated judgment, with high accountability and a clear track record, is critical. Now, this is something we could say about Callas as well. She had a very good track record with her own artistic choices, so why not trust her also with some broader vision type of things in the whole opera production? I don't know how far she actually went with the artistic direction, but I'm pretty sure she did share at least some points of view in some cases, because she, especially the more she had experience, the more she knew what were the pitfalls with certain types of operas and how they could make it even better. But now let's move on to the second area where Callas trusted her gut, when there was some big decisions and big career decisions to be made. And here's a revealing moment concerning this in the beginning of Callas's career, because she was offered 2 productions at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Let's listen to this clip from the 1967 interview with Edward Downes, where she talks about this.
I was offered in America in 1946 when I came here. Mr. Johnson was then director
Of the
Metropolitan, and I auditioned for them. In any case, then he offered me, I went the next day, and he offered me Fidelio in English to be sung, I think, in Philadelphia, and I said, no, thank you. And he says, why? I know you sing Fidelio. I said, yes, but I don't sing it in English. Well, he says, you sang it in Greek. Well, I said, I had to because I was in Greece. But I will not sing Fidelio in English. It's against my principles. Well, I said, offer you Butterfly. And I'm afraid I had to say no again to Butterfly because it was not an ideal debut. Because I think that the debut is most important. You must debut in the best opera or possibly your best opera.
No question.
No question. So I unfortunately had to say no. And then when I did say no, all my friends and, people around you said, well, she's crazy. Hi-hat, who does she think she is? She'll never get another chance like that, turning down the Metropolitan and blah, blah. Well, I really knew I had to do this, and if I was asked again, I'd do it again. But I promise you it was not easy with my own conscience after. And I was sitting around waiting for a chance. Then we were supposed to debut in Chicago. If you remember, they were supposed to open the season then and it bankrupt. And I didn't debut there. But then there was Nicola Rossilimeni who was supposed to sing Gioconda at the Arena. And he proposed me to Donatello, who was then the director of Arena. And I auditioned for him and he immediately gave me the contract.
And that was the
beginning.
That was the beginning.
Yep. She knew how important debuts are. She wanted to have the ideal debut. So even though she has no money, she's in New York waiting for an opportunity. And the Metropolitan Opera offers her 2 roles. She says no right off the bat because it wasn't... Yeah, she knew... How could I say? She didn't sell herself short. That's the main part. And I can't resist to making the parallel with Barbra Streisand once again. Another singer I admire a lot. Because she didn't sell herself short either when she was just as young. Also in New York, actually. Here's her memoir. My name is Barbara. I've listened to maybe halfway through this as an audiobook that she narrates herself. It's about 48 hours that she talks through this book. But it's really funny because she does some of the accents of the people. For example, here, when Callas Streisand had her debut in the Bonsoir nightclub off Broadway, I think it was off Broadway, yeah. After all the Broadway shows, people went to this nightclub where she sang these very fun songs in her own quirky way. And then she was about to be engaged in Funny Girl, the musical on Broadway. But around the same time, she knew she would need a recording contract. So Barbara's giving lots of credit to her manager, Marty Ehrlichman. This is how Barbara depicts the whole situation. My dear, devoted Marty, who always thought about what was best for me, rather than what would make him the most commission, had negotiated an unprecedented contract for a first-timer. In exchange for less money up front, I got creative control, which was more important to me than anything else. I was adamant about this. It meant I got to choose the songs I sang, and if I didn't like the way an album turned out, I could can it. The concept and the responsibility were all mine. Now this takes some guts. Barbara trusted her gut that she has artistic vision and she wants to be able to fulfill that completely without thinking about if someone has too much to say about it or too much power over the artistic choices. And that contract that she made with Columbia Records, I think, is still in power, probably. She still has this whole artistic power over all her albums. And that's enabled her to be completely free creatively because she's published so many different kinds of albums, different genres. She's been able to be really experimental and not be too concerned about the sales every time. But of course, Barbara's case is a rare one. It's a rare example of someone who has been able to actually fulfill her artistic ideas without being too constrained by other people. In some ways, yes, what she talks about with some other films that she did, she was constrained sometimes with her contracts, but at least musically, she got the artistic freedom and control that every artist deserves, basically, but it's not always given. But at the end of the day, you still have to compromise on some things, and it's a very fine balance to know when to compromise and on which stuff. We want to know our worth, we want to believe in ourselves and our judgment, but we can't be too arrogant either. But as you probably know, it's always in the beginning of your career that it's harder to know when to compromise and when not to. Here we just went through 2 examples of Callas and Streisand who didn't compromise on their artistic vision, but it doesn't mean that they never compromised on something. Here's another clip of Callas in the same interview with Edward Downes where she talks about this.
I'm going to tell you one thing. There's a certain time in your career that you have to do certain roles to have a contract. I had studied the bel canto roles, which even include Gioconda, which is just on the border of decent singing. Forgive me, I don't consider Puccini in the bel canto line. I think Ponchielli just about touches it.
You do so marvelously.
Granted. Yes, I do. It's an experience, but it is not good for the voice. Anybody could get away with it.
Yeah. So she did accept some roles that weren't completely the roles that she's very passionate about. But they were decent enough. Roles that still she felt like I could do this well. And if her collaborators seemed nice, and if the whole production seemed nice, why not? In the beginning of your career, you just need experience. That's all. At that point, it's always just good practice. You learn what you like and what you don't like doing. Even though you would have a sense of good judgment, you can't still trust it completely yet because you don't have that experience yet. Once you have the experience, you can start narrowing down what you do more clearly. But this is the sort of balance thing that we face with any sort of decision basically in life, with big life decisions notably, but even with smaller ones sometimes. And just to conclude this act, or this section, I'd like to take this other quote from Naval Ravikant's book. So here's how he approaches making big life decisions. If I'm faced with a difficult choice, such as, should I marry this person? Should I take this job? Should I buy this house? Should I move to this city? Should I go into business with this person? If you cannot decide, the answer is no. When you choose something, you get locked in for a long time. Starting a business may take 10 years. You start a relationship that will be 5 years or maybe more. You move to a city for 10 to 20 years. These are very, very long-lived decisions. It's very, very important. We only say yes when we are pretty certain. You're never going to be absolutely certain, but you're going to be very certain. If you find yourself creating a spreadsheet for a decision with a list of yes and no's, pros and cons, checks and balances, why this is good or bad, forget it. If you cannot decide, the answer is no. I like this. It's very straightforward. And I would like to believe that it is so. If you have to really think about it too much, then you're just finding reasons to say yes, whereas the real answer would be no. I can't think of an example right now when I would maybe have done a thing like this. Oh, actually, when I moved to Paris last year in 2024, or before that, in 2023, when I was planning this student exchange thing, Paris didn't feel at first like my first choice. I just felt that, yes, I already know how to speak French, and it probably will be very fun. But I wasn't completely convinced in the beginning when I started to plan this whole thing. But I was very certain that at least it will be very fun. So I ended up living there for a whole year, even though I went there for like 6 months I planned for 6 months and then I extended it. It was based on a gut feeling. I had some other options too, but Paris felt like the most certain one that I knew that I would probably enjoy. And it ended up being an experience that I'll never forget. I felt like I became alive in a sense when I moved there. I found like-minded people a bit more, and I loved the city in itself. But that was that sort of a decision where I didn't really do a spreadsheet, if I at least I don't remember doing one. It was more of a gut feeling that, yes, this could be a good decision. Let's go with it. Okay, but now in the next part, we'll go through the final nuances, the final touch that made Callas's work so compelling.